My entire world was reduced to the space between heartbeats, each one a silent drumbeat of dread in the oppressive quiet of the courtroom. The social worker, Eleanor Gable, had just concluded her testimony. Her words, each one a perfectly polished stone of malice, were not merely spoken. They were hurled, and they had all found their mark, lodging deep within my chest. They hung in the air now, a toxic cloud of doubt and condemnation aimed directly at my soul. A smirk, so faint it was barely there but as sharp as a razor's edge, played on her lips. It was a look of absolute, unshakable victory. She believed, with every fiber of her being, that she had just methodically demolished my life, that she had shattered my every hope of adopting Maya. The little girl who had pieced my own broken heart back together. The child who had become the very rhythm of my breathing. I felt the foundations of my spirit cracking, the hope that had been my only nourishment for months turning to ash in my trembling hands. Before I continue, make sure to subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, comment below and leave your like. Helps a lot. Just as the last of my resolve began to dissolve, the universe seemed to stutter. The rhythmic clicking of the court stenographer's keys fell silent. A collective, held breath swept through the room, a wave of unspoken anticipation. Every gaze, including my own, shifted from the venomous social worker to the man enthroned behind the bench. Judge Thomas Harris. He wasn't looking at Eleanor. His eyes were fixed on me. His face an unreadable sculpture of profound shock. And then I saw it, a sight so bizarre it felt like a hallucination. A tremor began in his fingers, a faint vibration that rapidly escalated into a violent, uncontrollable shaking. The gavel, held loosely in his grasp, jittered for a moment before slipping free. It clattered onto the polished wood of the bench, the sound exploding in the silence, echoing like a gunshot that signaled the start of a war. In that singular deafening moment, a secret buried for 7 long years, a truth so staggering I could never have conceived of it, was about to detonate. It was a truth that would not just redefine my life and Maya's. It would unravel the very fabric of everyone's reality. My name is Anna Peterson, and this was the climax of a battle that began 6 months earlier, with a simple, cherished dream, and a woman who seemed hell-bent on turning it into my worst possible nightmare. It all began not with a bang, but with a whisper, a digital ghost on the county adoption agency's website. It was a small, heavily pixelated photograph of a 7-year-old girl with eyes so deep and ancient they seemed to hold the weight of 1,000 untold tragedies. Her name was Maya. Her file was a collection of sterile, dismissive labels, withdrawn, challenging, resistant to affection. The narrative was stark. She had been lost in the labyrinth of the foster system for nearly 2 years, ever since her birth mother had allegedly vanished after a catastrophic car accident. She had been shuffled between 3 different foster homes, each placement ending with the same cold conclusion. She couldn't connect. She wouldn't let anyone in. But as I stared into that low-resolution image, I didn't see a challenging child. I saw a warrior. I saw a tiny, resilient soul whose light had been cruelly dimmed but could never be extinguished. And I knew, with a certainty that resonated in the very marrow of my bones, that I was looking at my daughter. For years, my life had been a meticulously painted landscape of quiet predictability. I was a successful graphic designer with a career that provided stability but little passion. My 2-bedroom house was a testament to my eye for design, cozy and curated, but it was also silent, its rooms echoing with an unspoken emptiness. My circle of friends was warm and supportive, yet at the end of every gathering, I would return to my quiet house and feel it. A profound, aching void. A hollow space carved out by a dream that had been declared impossible. From my earliest memories, I had wanted to be a mother. It wasn't a fleeting wish. It was part of my identity. But a team of compassionate yet firm doctors had delivered the verdict years ago. It would never happen for me. Adoption wasn't my second choice. It was my second chance at life itself. After a grueling year that felt like a decade, a mountain of paperwork, invasive home studies, and endlessly repetitive interviews, I was finally approved. And then I saw Maya. Our first meeting was held in a sterile, personality-less room at the agency, filled with brightly colored plastic toys that felt more like props than objects of joy. Maya sat in a tiny chair, a small, still figure in a world that had always been too loud and chaotic for her. Her hands were folded primly in her lap, her gaze fixed on the scuffed toes of her worn-out sneakers. The silence was thick with her history of distrust. I didn't try to force a connection. I simply sat on the floor a few feet away, making myself small and unthreatening, just sharing the space with her. After what felt like an eternity of quiet observation, I pulled a sketchbook and a set of charcoal pencils from my bag. I didn't draw her. I didn't want her to feel like a subject to be studied. Instead, I began to sketch a whimsical, magical forest, populated with squirrels in tiny waistcoats and mischievous, winged fairies. Slowly, cautiously, she crept closer, her bare feet silent on the linoleum. She watched for a long time before pointing a single small finger at a squirrel I was shading under a large mushroom. "He looks sad," she whispered. Her voice was a fragile, raspy thing, as if it hadn't been used in a long time. I looked up, meeting her gaze, and offered a gentle smile. "Maybe," I said softly. "He's just waiting for a friend." That was the key. That was the moment the lock on her heart gave a tiny click. That was our beginning. Bringing her home was like watching a black and white film slowly, miraculously bloom into breathtaking color. The first few weeks were a delicate dance. She was a ghost in my house, a silent, watchful presence flitting at the edges of my life. But I had a deep well of patience, a reservoir of love I had been waiting my whole life to give. I didn't push, I invited. I would sit on the floor of her room and gently braid her beautiful thick hair, telling her that her skin, the color of rich, polished ebony, was a royal crown. We filled the house with a warm, comforting scent of vanilla and sugar as we baked cookies, her small hands learning to pat the dough with tentative joy. We planted a small garden in the backyard, and I watched, my heart swelling, as she gently patted the soil around a new tomato plant as if tucking it into bed. Every single night, without fail, I would read to her. Her small, tense body would slowly, night by night, relax against mine as we journeyed to lands of dragons and magic. And then one day she laughed. It wasn't a small chuckle. It was a full, bubbling, joyous sound that erupted from her. So pure and miraculous it felt like I was witnessing the sun rise for the very first time. The challenging child from the file vanished, and in her place was a bright, deeply empathetic, and brilliantly funny little girl who had simply been starved of the one thing she needed most, the safety of unconditional love. My house was no longer a house. It was a home. All that remained was the final adoption hearing, a mere formality, my caseworker had assured me. A celebration. That's when Eleanor Gable was assigned to our case for the final review. The moment she stepped over my threshold, it was as if all the warmth and color we had cultivated was instantly curdled. She was a tall, severe woman in her 50s, with a smile that was a masterpiece of insincerity. It stretched her lips but never once reached her cold, calculating eyes. Her gaze didn't absorb our happy home. It scanned it, sweeping over every surface with a critical air, like an inspector looking for cracks in a foundation. I watched her eyes linger on the family photos I had proudly displayed on the mantelpiece. Me, a white woman, beaming next to this beautiful, radiant black child, and I saw it. A subtle, almost imperceptible flicker of disapproval, of judgment. It was just a slight tightening of her jaw, a momentary narrowing of her eyes, but it was as clear as a scream in a silent room. Her words were perfectly polite, her questions standard, but I couldn't shake the chilling premonition that she wasn't there to help. She was there to find a problem. And I began to fear, with a cold dread that settled deep in my stomach, that if she couldn't find one, she was more than willing to create one. The first tremor of the coming earthquake arrived on a sun-drenched Tuesday afternoon, during a routine home visit just weeks before the final court date. Sunlight streamed into the living room, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Maya was on the floor, her face alight with pride, showing Eleanor the magnificent, sprawling castle she'd built from magnetic tiles. I was in the kitchen preparing her favorite snack, apple slices with peanut butter, humming to myself, feeling a cautious wave of optimism. Maybe I had been wrong about Eleanor. Maybe her coldness was just professionalism. Eleanor knelt, her movements stiff and unnatural, as if interacting with a child was a foreign, unpleasant task. Her voice, when she spoke, was a syrupy sweet concoction that set my teeth on edge. "That's a very impressive castle, Maya," she said, her smile not touching her eyes. "Tell me, sweetie, where did you come from before you came to live with Anna?" Maya, as she always did, glanced at me, a quick, silent check-in that had become our little ritual of trust. I smiled and gave her a reassuring nod. She turned back to Eleanor, her expression open and achingly earnest. "I think I came from heaven," she said, her voice small but clear. "Mommy says God knew she needed me very much, so he sent me special delivery to her." It was the perfect, innocent, beautiful answer of a child who had finally found her safe harbor. But Eleanor didn't see beauty. She saw an opportunity. She let out a sharp, ugly bark of a laugh. "Oh, honey, that's a very cute story," she chuckled, patting Maya's head with a condescending touch. "But you didn't come from heaven. You're a little brownie who came from the brownie factory. I think you must have forgotten the recipe and got lost in the wrong oven." She winked, a grotesque, conspiratorial gesture, as if she were sharing a clever, harmless joke. The warmth in the room evaporated. The sunlight seemed to turn cold. I saw the exact moment the words landed, like physical blows. Maya's radiant smile vanished, collapsing inward. Her small shoulders, which had been so proud moments before, slumped in defeat. A hot, dark flush of shame crept up her neck and spread across her face. She looked down at her own beautiful brown skin as if it were a stain, something dirty, something wrong. The brownie from the wrong oven. In that instant, a switch flipped deep inside me. A primal, protective rage I never knew I was capable of surged through my veins like molten lava. I walked out of the kitchen, my hands clenched into fists at my sides, fighting for a composure I did not feel. "Eleanor," I said, my voice dangerously low and shaking with a fury that terrified me. "The visit is over. Get out of my house. Now." Eleanor's saccharine facade dissolved, replaced by a smug, offended expression. She stood up slowly, deliberately brushing off her skirt as if she'd been contaminated by something unclean. "I will be sure to note your unprovoked hostility in my official report, Mrs. Peterson," she said, her voice now dripping with unconcealed malice. Uncontrolled anger is not a desirable trait in a prospective mother, especially for a child with this background. She turned and walked out, leaving a trail of pure poison in her wake. That night was the worst we had endured since Maya first came to live with me. She clung to me, her small body racked with sobs that seemed too large and too painful for her little frame. "She thinks I'm wrong, Mommy," she wept into my shirt, her words muffled by the fabric. "She thinks I don't belong here because I'm brown. Am I a mistake?" Holding her, I felt a terror so profound and so deep it was paralyzing. This woman, with one casually cruel racist remark, had threatened to undo months of patient, loving healing. She had planted a seed of self-hatred in the fertile soil of my child's heart. The next morning, my hands still shaking with a mixture of anger and fear, I called the adoption agency and demanded to speak to Eleanor's supervisor, a man named Mr. Henderson. His voice was a smooth, bureaucratic oil slick, perfectly modulated to soothe hysterical women like me. I recounted what had happened, keeping my voice as steady as possible, though it was edged with a desperate urgency. He listened, making placating, non-committal humming sounds. "I see," he said when I finally finished, the words devoid of any real empathy. "Well, Anna, I have known Eleanor for 15 years. She is the consummate professional. I think this is just a simple, unfortunate misinterpretation. She's from an older generation, her sense of humor can be, well, a bit dated. I am quite sure she meant it as an innocent joke." A joke? I was incredulous, my voice rising despite my best efforts. Telling a 7-year-old black child in a transracial adoption that she's a brownie from the wrong oven is not a joke. It is racist, and it is deeply, profoundly damaging. "Now, let's not throw around such serious and inflammatory accusations," he said, his tone instantly turning cold and hard. "You're obviously a very sensitive parent. That's understandable, given the circumstances." He was twisting it, masterfully turning my righteous anger into evidence that I was the unstable one. He concluded the call with a threat so thinly veiled it was practically transparent. "You can file a formal complaint, of course. That is your right. But with the final hearing just next week, a judge might view such an action as disruptive. It could easily delay the adoption by months, perhaps even a year, while it's investigated." I hung up the phone, my blood running cold. It was a trap, plain and simple. He was telling me to be silent, or risk losing the very person I was trying to protect. My lawyer confirmed my worst fears later that day. "Frankly, Anna, it's a he said, she said situation. It's your word against a 15-year veteran and her direct supervisor," he said, his tone grim. "Without a recording or a third-party witness, a judge will almost always side with the agency experts. They'll paint you as an overreactive, hysterical parent who is struggling with the complexities of a transracial adoption." The nightmare was no longer a fear. It was my reality. A few days later, my lawyer forwarded me Eleanor's final report. I read it with a growing sense of sick horror. It was a masterpiece of character assassination, a work of fiction designed for maximum damage. Every positive aspect of our life was spun into a glaring negative. "While Anna has provided a stable home environment," one line read, "there are significant concerns about a potential cultural mismatch that may impede the child's long-term identity formation." She twisted my fierce protection of Maya into a pathology. "The prospective mother exhibits significant hostility and defensiveness when her methods are questioned, suggesting underlying anger issues and an inability to partner with the agency." My desperate call to her boss was meticulously documented as a clear example of the parent's tendency toward hysterical overreaction and fabricating complaints. She wasn't just noting concerns. She was methodically building a case to rip my daughter away from me. A sickening wave of guilt began to eat at me. Had I caused this? If I had just smiled through her poison, gritted my teeth and swallowed her cruelty, would we be safe? Maya, with the uncanny sensitivity of a child who has known trauma, could feel the tension coiling in our home. The brilliant light in her eyes, which I had fought so hard to rekindle, began to dim again. One evening, as I was tucking her into bed, she asked the question that I had been dreading, her voice a tiny whisper in the dark. "Mommy, if the judge listens to Miss Gable, will I have to go away?" I held her face in my hands, trying to project a confidence I didn't feel. "I will never, ever let that happen," I promised, my voice thick. But inside I was shattered. It felt like I was standing on a beach, watching a tidal wave rise on the horizon, with nothing but my bare hands to hold it back. It was in that abyss of despair that a new feeling began to stir. Suspicion. This couldn't just be about one racist comment, as horrific as it was. The way her supervisor, Henderson, immediately and flawlessly defended her, the way they both used the same language to paint me as unstable, it felt too coordinated, too slick. It felt like they weren't just covering up a mistake. Felt like they were actively hiding something much, much bigger. Driven by a gut-wrenching instinct that this was my only chance, I spent the next 3 nights descending into a rabbit hole of paperwork. After Maya was asleep, I would spread every document from her thick case file across my dining room table, my eyes burning under the lamplight, searching for anything. And then, in the deepest hours of the 3rd night, I found it. It was small, almost nothing. On an initial intake form from 2 years prior, Maya's date of birth was listed as May 10, 2017. But on the official more recent case summary, the one everyone used, it was listed as May 10, 2018. A full year's difference. I had noticed it months ago, and a caseworker had breezily dismissed it as a common typo. But now it felt like a clue. I dug deeper, my heart pounding. The police report about her mother's car accident was shockingly vague. No specific location, no time of day. Just single car accident, mother presumed deceased. Presumed. Why not confirmed? Why were the hospital records and the accident report itself sealed so tightly, even from me? The more I looked, the more the pieces refused to fit. It was a puzzle where the most important pieces were being deliberately and skillfully hidden. If you're still here with me, don't forget to subscribe, activate notifications, leave your like, and share this video with someone. The courtroom felt like a mausoleum. The dark, imposing wood panels seemed to soak up all the light and hope, and the air was stale with the scent of old paper and palpable anxiety. I sat at the plaintiff's table, my back ramrod straight, my hand engulfing Maya's. Her hand was so small and fragile in mine. She wore her blue brave dress, a gift from me for this day, but she looked like a tiny forgotten doll against the imposing monstrous backdrop of the law. At the head of the room, enthroned behind the elevated bench, sat Judge Thomas Harris, a man whose stern face looked like it had been chiseled from a block of unyielding granite. He called the proceedings to order, his voice a low, powerful rumble that commanded an immediate, absolute silence. My heart was a wild bird trapped in my ribcage, hammering desperately against my bones. Eleanor Gable was called to the stand first. She walked with the unshakable confidence of someone who knows the system is on her side, her plain gray suit like a suit of armor. She was sworn in and began to speak, her voice a flat, professional monotone that was somehow more chilling than open anger. Ms. Anna Peterson has met all statutory requirements for this adoption, she began, reading from her notes. The agency has conducted all necessary home and psychological studies. Therefore, the department's official recommendation is to finalize the adoption. A wave of relief so intense it made me dizzy washed over me. My lawyer shot me a hopeful, surprised look. She was letting it go. It was over. The nightmare was over. But then her tone shifted. The air grew cold again. She looked up from her notes, her gaze landing squarely on the judge. However, she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial, serious tone, for the official record, and for the long-term well-being of the child, the agency feels compelled to note several significant, ongoing concerns. The room, which had just exhaled, went utterly silent again. As this is a transracial adoption, there remain serious questions regarding the child's future ability to form a healthy identity. The child is already exhibiting signs of profound confusion, fabricating elaborate and concerning stories about her origins. Furthermore, the prospective mother, Mrs. Peterson, has demonstrated marked emotional instability and a pattern of hostility that could prove deeply detrimental to a child requiring specialized, therapeutic understanding. She spoke these devastating lies with such calm, clinical authority that they sounded like undeniable facts. My lawyer did his best to dismantle the fiction. Ms. Gable, isn't it true that what you are calling fabricating stories was, in fact, a 7-year-old child expressing a belief that she came from heaven? It is a classic manifestation of an abandonment fantasy, common in children with her trauma profile, Eleanor retorted smoothly, never breaking her focused eye contact with the judge. And this hostility you speak of, my lawyer pressed, his voice rising, didn't it occur immediately after you called this vulnerable child a brownie from the wrong oven? A shocked gasp rippled through the small gallery. Eleanor's face tightened for a fraction of a second, but she didn't flinch. As I explained in detail to my supervisor, it was an unfortunate, old-fashioned attempt at humor that Mrs. Peterson, in her heightened emotional state, grossly and willfully misinterpreted. Then it was my turn. My legs felt like they were made of jelly as I walked to the stand. I spoke from the deepest part of my heart, my voice breaking as I described the fierce, boundless love I had for Maya. I recounted Eleanor's cruel joke, and the devastating, soul-crushing effect it had on my daughter. Tears streamed down my face, hot and unstoppable. It wasn't humor, I finished, my voice thick with emotion as I looked at the judge. It was casual cruelty. It was racism. It was an act designed to make my daughter feel shame for who she is. And no child on this earth deserves that. I glanced at the gallery. I saw pity on a few faces, but on most, I saw skepticism. I could practically hear their thoughts. She's so emotional. The agency professionals know best. I looked at Judge Harris, searching for a sign, any sign at all. His face was a stoic, unreadable mask. His pen tapped a steady, rhythmic, maddening beat on his legal pad. Each tap felt like another nail being hammered into the coffin of my dreams. The turning point came from nowhere. The judge, waving off an objection from the agency's lawyer, began his own line of questioning. He leaned forward, his piercing eyes finally leaving his notepad and fixing on Eleanor. "Ms. Gable," he began, his voice deceptively mild. "I am looking at the child's official file. Could you please confirm her date of birth for the court?" Eleanor blinked, caught momentarily off guard by the simple question. "Of course, Your Honor. It is May 10th, 2018. Judge Harris slowly, deliberately turned a page in the file before him. "That's interesting," he said, his voice dropping an octave, a new, sharp edge to it. "Because the initial intake form, filed the day she entered state care, lists the date as May 10th, 2017. Full year earlier. Can you explain that discrepancy?" A nervous flush crept up Eleanor's neck. A clerical error, Your Honor. Simple typo. The official record was later corrected to reflect the accurate date." "Corrected?" The judge repeated the word as if it tasted foul. His voice was now laced with ice. "I see. And the birth mother's name?" Eleanor blanched, her smug confidence visibly cracking. "Unknown, Your Honor. As the file states, she was presumed deceased following a car accident." The judge leaned back, his eyes narrowing to slits. "Presumed? Tell me, Ms. Gable, are you at all familiar with the name Georgia Tan?" The agency's lawyer shot to his feet. "Objection. Relevance, Your Honor. This is a historical matter." "Overruled." "Sit down, counsel," the judge snapped, his voice cracking like a whip. His gaze was locked on Eleanor, who now looked physically ill. "Georgia Tan," the judge continued, his voice low and menacing, "ran an adoption agency in Tennessee for decades. She grew wealthy by trafficking children, by falsifying their records, and by stealing newborn babies from poor, vulnerable mothers. Does any of that ring any bells for you, Ms. Gable?" "That was decades ago. It has absolutely nothing to do with this case." Eleanor stammered, her voice rising in panic. "And that's when it happened. That's when I saw it." The judge's hands began to shake. It wasn't a tremor. It was a violent, visible shudder that seemed to rack his entire body. His face went impossibly pale, a canvas of profound sorrow and pure, unadulterated rage. He raised his gavel as if to strike it, but his hand was trembling so hard it slipped from his grasp. It clattered loudly onto the desk, the sound echoing in the tomb-like silence. "Approach the bench," he commanded. His voice no longer a rumble, but a raw, broken whisper. "All of you. Now." My lawyer and I rose on unsteady feet and walked toward the bench, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The agency's lawyer and a visibly sweating Eleanor Gable did the same, their faces a mixture of confusion and fear. "Mr. Bailiff," Judge Harris said, his voice strained and tight, "secure the courtroom doors. No one leaves this room." He turned his wild eyes to the clerk. "Bring me the file on case number 7-3-4B. The one I had you retrieve and seal this morning." The clerk scurried from the room and returned moments later with a thick, worn folder, which Judge Harris practically ripped open. "6 weeks ago," he began, his voice low and vibrating with a deep, personal pain that was terrifying to behold. "Certain anomalies in this case caught my attention. Clerical errors that weren't just typos. Vague reports. Red flags everywhere. They reminded me of an older, darker story I know all too well. A story where vulnerable young mothers were told their babies had died in childbirth, when in reality, they had been stolen and sold. A modern-day Georgia Tan scandal, operating right under our noses." He pulled a document from the new file. It was a DNA report. When Maya first entered the system, a routine DNA sample was taken, as is standard procedure. That sample was run against several law enforcement databases, including a sealed, private database of missing persons and their close relatives. A database I have had personal access to for the last 7 years. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. The courtroom was so silent I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. Her sample triggered a familial match, the judge said, his voice finally cracking, shattering his judicial composure. He looked directly at me then, and in his eyes I saw the raw, bottomless agony of a father. A match to a profile submitted by my wife and me. We have been searching for our daughter for 8 years, and for our granddaughter for the last 7. A collective gasp sucked the air from the room. The floor seemed to drop out from under me. Maya's grandfather. The judge. My mind couldn't process it. Maya's mother, my daughter Elizabeth, did not die in a car accident, Judge Harris said, his voice now thick with unshed tears. She suffered a severe postpartum psychotic break shortly after giving birth. Her boyfriend, Maya's father, was young and terrified. He took her to a private mental health facility. A facility with financial ties to this very adoption agency. They coerced my sedated, ill daughter into signing surrender papers she couldn't possibly understand. They told the young father that the baby had died from complications. They created a fake car accident report, a ghost to explain a mother's disappearance, and they funneled a healthy, beautiful baby girl into their system for a lucrative private, high-fee adoption. He slammed his hand on the bench, the sound making everyone flinch. This was never about a cultural mismatch, Ms. Gable. This was child trafficking. Your vile little brownie joke wasn't just racism. You were mocking her for the very thing you were trying to erase. Her true heritage, her connection to my daughter, her grandmother, and to me. He held up another document, shaking it with fury. My private investigation confirmed it all. 2017 birth date was correct. It matched the timeline of my daughter's disappearance. You and your supervisor, Mr. Henderson, actively falsified official state documents to cover up the original abduction. You tampered with evidence. You committed felony perjury on this stand, in my courtroom. He looked past her, his eyes finding the bailiff standing by the door. Bailiff, take Ms. Eleanor Gable into custody on charges of perjury, conspiracy to commit kidnapping, and felony records tampering. Issue a warrant for the immediate arrest of her supervisor, Daniel Henderson. This adoption agency is to be shut down immediately, its records seized, pending a full state and federal investigation. Eleanor Gable simply crumpled. All the smug arrogance, all the cold certainty, drained from her face, replaced by pure animal terror. No, she whimpered as a bailiff firmly cuffed her hands behind her back. You can't. It was. Her words were cut off as she was led, sobbing and incoherent, from the courtroom that had been her stage, now her prison. The days that followed were a surreal, chaotic blur. The story exploded across the state, then the nation. It was a scandal of unimaginable proportions, exposing a corruption and child trafficking ring that had been hiding in plain sight for over a decade. Under the threat of life sentences, Eleanor and Mr. Henderson quickly turned on each other, their testimony uncovering a horrifying system where they had targeted vulnerable new mothers, poor women, single women, women suffering from postpartum depression, falsifying records to create a steady stream of orphans for their network of wealthy, unsuspecting clients. My own adoption hearing was held again a week later, but it was nothing like the first. This time, it was a private, quiet proceeding in a different, kind-faced judge's chambers. Judge Harris was not on the bench. He was sitting in the back row, his arm around a woman with a gentle face and the same deep, kind eyes as Maya, his wife, my daughter's grandmother. The finalization was exactly as it should have been from the very beginning. A simple, beautiful, and joyous ceremony. When the new judge pronounced me Maya's legal and permanent mother, I burst into tears, not of fear but of pure, unadulterated love and relief. Maya, who was sitting on my lap, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, threw her small arms around my neck and whispered into my ear, "We're forever, Mommy." "Right. Forever and always, my love." I sobbed, holding her tight. Afterward, in the quiet, sunlit hallway, Thomas and his wife, Sarah, approached us. Sarah knelt down in front of Maya, her own eyes swimming with tears that she didn't try to hide. "Hello, beautiful girl," she said, her voice soft as velvet. "My name is Grandma Sarah, and this is your Grandpa Thomas. We have been looking for you and for your mommy for a very, very long time." Maya looked at me, a silent question in her big, expressive eyes. I nodded, smiling through my own tears. She looked back at Sarah, and with the simple, profound wisdom that only a child possesses, she reached out her small hand and gently touched Sarah's tear-streaked cheek. "You found me," she said. "There was never a fight over custody. There was never a moment of tension or a hint of a threat. They never made me feel like anything less than Maya's true and only mother. They saw the unbreakable bond between us. They understood that I was her home, her safety, her world. They didn't want to take her from me. They simply wanted to join our family. Our little family of 2 didn't shrink that day. It miraculously grew. It expanded to include 2 of the most loving, doting, and utterly devoted grandparents a child could ever hope for. That Christmas, our once quiet house was filled with the loud, joyful, chaotic noise and warmth of a real, sprawling family. My brilliant, resilient, incredible daughter was surrounded by a universe of people who adored her. Her laughter the most beautiful music echoing through the halls. Looking at her that night, nestled securely between her grandpa and me as we read a bedtime story, I thought about Eleanor Gable. Her cruelty, born of a toxic mix of prejudice and greed, was designed to tear our small world apart. But in a twist of fate so perfect it felt scripted by a higher power, her poison became the antidote. Her wicked, calculated lie accidentally uncovered a sacred, hidden truth. In her desperate attempt to break us, she not only gave me my daughter forever, but she gave my daughter back her entire family. Thank you for listening to my story. The fight for my daughter was the hardest and most terrifying thing I have ever done, but it proved that love is a force of nature more powerful than any lie, more resilient than any evil. Please subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, comment below, leave your like, and share this video with others.